What's up, Mouseketeers? It is I, oh my god, I'm exhausted, GM. Yes, I went to Disneyland yesterday with my family, with my niece. It was my Christmas present to get to spend the day at Disneyland with my niece. Yes, I sold out, and I'm perfectly fine with that, but oh god, I haven't been there in 20 years. And it was exhausting. So we're a little behind on vlogs and videos and what's just general stuff. Haven't even looked at the gaming news today, except for this Points of Light thing. What's up with this Points of Light campaign setting thing? Where did this come from? Apparently it's a thing. Apparently it's been a thing for a while, and apparently it's a D&D thing, an official D&D thing that I never knew about. Did anybody know about this? I mean, the first time I think I heard it mentioned was an article last week, and I read most of the article, but it was very confusing because I was like, what are you referring to? A book? A TV show? Just of a philosophy? I mean, the Points of Light. That's, 1,000 points of light. That's from one of Bush's political speeches, right? Or 1,000 points of light. That's like referring to outer space and the stars. So there's an article, and I read it, and I was like, okay, what is this referring to? But then it came up again today in something, and I was like, no, I haven't really looked at any D&D news today, so I don't know if something happened yesterday or Monday that I missed. And I was like, okay, what's this Points of Light thing? So I put on my big boy brain and Googled it. Points of Light, D&D. Apparently, Points of Light refers to Nether, which was the official campaign setting for 4th edition Dungeons & Dragons. Now, like most people, I assumed 4th edition Dungeons & Dragons official campaign setting was either just the generic D&D campaign setting of the Forgotten Realms, or Eberron. I just figured, what's the first module that's going to come out? That's, did they do a Swords Coast, whatever? I mean, I never thought about that there was a separate, unique campaign setting for 4E, but apparently there was, and it was called the Points of Light / Nether campaign. I look through the 2 pieces of 4th edition product I still own, the Player's Handbook and an adventure. I couldn't find any mention in it of a separate campaign. If you look through the introduction at 4th, it just sort of gives a general overall, this is D&D, this is what a world of D&D is like, this is what you can expect, this is our history, this is where we are now. But nothing about a very specific campaign. I don't have the DM's guide for 4E. I don't think I ever did. And the only other thing I have for 4E is an adventure. But yeah, I Googled it, and it's a thing. It's a completely separate world from Realms or Greyhawk or Eberron. They made their own world that was completely separate from 4E. I did not know this. This changes so much. Because, my defense for 4E has always been, had they not called it Dungeons & Dragons at first, called it something else for a year, And then at the end of the year, go, what do you think of this? Do you enjoy this system? Would you like to see it become 4th edition Dungeons & Dragons? I really think, we all know there's hundreds of mistakes that they made going into, during, and after 4th edition. It's just a playbook of how to do everything wrong. But if you could, I could narrow it down to two things. One of those would be they should have called it the Eberron role-playing game. Push it as the Eberron role-playing game for a year. At the end of the year, go, do you think this system would work in 4th edition? And if people said yes, bam, 4th edition. If people said no, then they could have kept supporting it. It is a separate game. And then we would eventually see what we see now as 5th or something. I don't know. But now that I know that it's not a Forgotten Realms world or a Greyhawk world or even Eberron, but its own separate world, I'm like, okay, well, this is always what I thought it should be. How come you didn't call it that when it came out, The world of the Points of Light campaign. And Points of Light campaign has completely separate rules than D&D because it's a completely different universe other than it uses D20. At the end of that year, you go, okay, would you like to see the Points of Light campaign be the introduction to the next edition of Dungeons & Dragons? I mean, you still put out 1 or 2 products for 3 during the same year, but you really push the Points of Light. And at the end of that year, bam. And if people go, oh my God, yes, this system's amazing. Can you please open up Points of Light to be the new official D&D game? Bam! There you go. And if people go, no, this is stupid. What were you thinking? This system makes no sense. It's overly complicated. They could have gone, okay, yes, but it's only for Points of Light. We are working on 5th edition D&D. Give us another couple months, and then bam, we see what we see now, or some variation of that. It probably would have been close to what we see now, I would say, if they had done that. So, yeah, it makes you rethink 4th edition, knowing now that 4th edition really was completely separate from what we would refer to as the core Dungeons & Dragons world. Greyhawk going into Forgotten Realms going forward. But now here's this little separate world, the Points of Light campaign. Very interesting, almost quasi-Greek origin, slightly different gods than the gods we're used to for D&D. Obviously, because Nether, the Points of Light universe, is not the D&D universe, different laws of physics, which explains why 4th edition is so different than 3 and 5. It is a completely different game that uses the D20 system. So I'm just like, I'm sort of in shock that I never knew this. And I can't find any mention of it in the 2 4E products I own. I'm going to have to go to my friendly local game store, that's Seth's Games and Anime here in Ventura, and look at the 4E product there that they still might have to see what, if anything, mentions this. And it definitely feels like it deserves more of a deep dive. And it's just, in closing, one, sort of interesting that after all this time, 2014 is when 5e came out, so 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 8 years. 4th edition was technically in the public eye for what? I want to say 5 years, 6 years, without looking at the date. So 13 years, more or less. I'm probably wrong, but let's say 15 years. 15 years, and this is the first I've heard of Points of Light. This is the first I've heard of the world of Nether or Nezer or whatever it is called. And in the past week, it's come up twice. And not just simple mention, but like full-blown articles. So that's just weird that out of nowhere. And second, it just sort of explains 4th E so much. And it sort of just does go into, in closing, if I could have one defense for that product, it would have been, like I said, no, release it as something else, give it a year, because it is so drastically different. If they like it, then call it 4E. And if they just don't like it, hey, it's not the first time you've made separate universes using D20 that were completely different than, classic D&D. Dark Sun, Spelljammer, Planescape, Dragonlance, Eberron, completely different rules using the D20 system. Not part of the core D&D sacred timeline. Not part of Greyhawk, not part of Mithras, not part of the Hollow World, not part of the Forgotten Realms. Their own separate things. So had I known. So in closing, what do you think about this? Does this change your opinion of 4th edition at all? Are you interested in finding out more about the Points of Light campaign? Do you think it's something Wizards of the Coast or another company should revisit? Could this be the birth of a 4th edition renaissance? Well, there already is sort of a 4th edition renaissance that's been going on for a couple of years. But yeah, what is out there? What doors does the knowledge of this existence open? Or do you just not care? Are you just like, yeah, nothing can say 4E, but this is interesting. I did not know this. Did you know this? I didn't know this. Anyways, that's it. We'll get back to our regular scheduled nonsense in about an hour. Till then, I am your exhausted guide to all the tabletop role-playing game news, weather, sports, and general internet nonsense. Finally feeling a little justified in defending 4th edition, and very curious to wanting to know more about this campaign setting. But that's it for today. Subscribe if you haven't yet. Help me hit 1,000 subs. And I don't know, we'll go back to Disneyland. Till then, see ya.